point.
Through the chair, I mean, it's a point well made. We're not sitting here today with solutions to that, but if we've created a more flexible tool set and got more confident and comfortable around infrastructure targeted rates, then it probably does challenge the organisation to address a few proposals that will feel like they're out of sequence. Well, and that'll be a challenge we have, and, you know, probably a healthy challenge.
Well, Mr Chair, I hope that Councillor Darby was reflecting on those comments, because I think that will be the most obvious corollary of the target land rate will be the future land supply strategy and whether we're prepared to accept a more permissive development program.
Can I just comment on this too, that the targeted rate, really the core decision that Council will be invited to make in June is around the revenue and financing policy change, which will enable them to be used. And the actual decisions are going to be discrete case-by-case decisions in defined areas of land. So those sort of issues will actually be able to be made transparent and landed at the time that Council takes decisions on those discrete parcels of land. So there is a mechanism to make sure that we're very cognisant if it's out of sequence. But I think probably the intention at the moment is that it is consistent with the future urban land zoning release strategy. So point well made, but I think the way it's actually going to be implemented will ensure those issues are clearly and properly analysed at the time.
And my one other question, Mr Chair, I guess coming back to the visitor levy and the discussion around if there has been modelling of the ability to get uptake from this so as to eliminate leakage. Could some information that has been developed be circulated so that we can understand how what level of coverage you might be able to get from that, so as to ensure that, so that we understand the scope of this?
Through the chair, I think we can begin to explore those issues at the workshop that's planned soon on these measures, and also the key work needs to be done over the next 2 months as we lead into the public document itself in February, and we want to work with the industry on that. But I think these are the issues that need to be made transparent and discussed. And when, the use of targeted rates in this area is not a perfect tool. We acknowledge that, because you'd rather have something that's more like a sales tax rather than using one of our rating bases. But that's the issue we need to work with industry on too over the next 2 to 6 months as we actually refine the policy design. But we'd like to actually get more into some of the policy issues as we begin to design it, and the first opportunity will be in early December.
All right, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I've got a number of questions. The first one on the living wage. Are there any major policy changes to the way the living wage was presented to councillors last term that the Mayor's proposing this time?
I'm not sure, through the Chair, I'm not sure there's anyone on the table here could actually answer that question with any accuracy.
Okay, well, I'll hold that and we
yeah.
Okay. Because it cost a lot less last time. So
yeah, the modelling. What I can comment on is I think some of the forecasting done in previous iterations had didn't necessarily fully cover the Crown-controlled organisations, and there was some other missing stuff around wage compression issues. Which
so can you just note that first for discussion?
Yep. No, we'll make sure that's fully set out in the discussion in December.
But also, Councillor Simpson, the proposal last time was actually just the council parent body.
Yeah.
It didn't incorporate the CCOs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, my second question is around the local board targeted rate. And I noticed that this paper says that if the local boards haven't highlighted this by the end of February, well, then they would have to, and then they didn't want to make it as part of the LTP discussion, that they would have to do it separately. Do you know what kind of a cost that is for a local board? Who bears that cost to go out to its community on a targeted rate? I just happen to know that there's Ellerslie community and Ōrākei has already mooted it. It's not here to do, although they can get it in. But what would be the cost if they missed the deadline, knowing that their local board plan engagement is going to not be in conflict?
We'd look for opportunities to link it with other consultation, and we'd probably wear most of any cost associated with it.
We being?
Us.
Us.
So
Council.
think of that as general fund as opposed to asking the local
Slush fund.
boards to.
Slush fund. Excellent, excellent. The visitor levy, the question I have on the visitor levy, which I, as you know, absolutely support in principle. Item 36.36, I think it's a really good idea, not only that you have potentially the levy, but then you look at putting the industry together, inviting them to participate on a governance structure, but you're using the tourism sector in there, where you've mentioned that this governance structure would be asking the tourism and accommodation sector to be part of that, and yet I didn't think the levy was being applied to the tourism sector. Is it separate to the accommodation? Could you just clarify that?
Chair, look, the reasoning behind that is that the accommodation sector is one important part of the tourism visitor sector. It is a sector that will be, if the policy is adopted, will be charged the rate. But the core point is that this is a levy on visitors, and the intent here is that, notwithstanding the fact that the hotel and accommodation sector is it's a sector that's been charged the targeted rate, it's a broader group of industry players who actually have an interest in how the marketing and events dollars are spent. So that's the intent. It's a visitor levy, it's not a hotel levy.
So, supplementary question. So this is actually really involving that sector at a much greater level than they've ever been involved before, in actually, in basically their core business, and working with us to make sure.
Yeah. So it's a hybrid, or it's a variant of the notion of no taxation without representation.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Excellent. Okay, and then just on the rates increase, because there are a number of councillors around the table that signed up to the Ratepayers Alliance pledge of 2%. And of course, this is at 2.5. So I just want to confirm a couple of things, that the 2.5 would, that we're already going to find 3 to 6% savings across the council family, that the CRL is included in the maths around that, and that a 2% credit, a 2% rates rise would affect our credit downgrade by, what was it, Sue? How many?
It's several million.
Several million dollars.
Sort of circa 40 million easily.
$30 to $40 million. Because I mean, you've got, I'm just looking for some justification. You're making savings, you've got the CRL included, you're still able to keep service levels as they currently are, but it's got to be 2.5.
Okay, through the chair. Look, this is more. This is me drawing on my previous experience at the Treasury, where when you're doing expenditure drives, it's actually to facilitate either more government spending in valued areas or tax cuts. But the challenge facing this council is that the equivalent of tax cuts really isn't on the agenda, given the infrastructure demands that we're facing in the future. So the key point is that we need to sustain a revenue growth to actually create the financial headroom for capital investment in housing and transport infrastructure. That's why it's been set at that. So irrespective of the savings we might achieve in council operations, the current policy intent is that all that cash is actually reassigned for capital investment.
Yeah. And I can give you just, this is not a cute answer, but remember, for those that did sign up to a goal of 2%, that was based on the LTP being at 3.5, but also the LTP having that target of lessening the business differential. So by actually saying a 2% rate rise with the assumption the differential would continue to lessen, in effect was a 2.5% rate rise for residents. Okay? So, in effect, you're not breaking a pledge because you're delivering exactly what's, because the 2% average rate rise would have been 2.5 for residents, okay? And it would have been 1.1, looking for heads are up, 1.1 I think, or 1.2 for business. So, in effect, by pausing the differential and we're going for 2.5 is delivering exactly the same as your commitment to a 2% rate rise on average. So you're not doing anything wrong there or breaking any pledge. That's
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
okay. Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's a shame the mayor and deputy had to leave, but during a discussion on the mayoral proposal. But I think overall it's looking in a good direction. The living wage, the visitors levy, I think is a good idea. In principle, I think a lot of people, if they're staying in hotels in Auckland, they are probably not going to be too hurt by a $6 or $10 extra charge for the greatness of coming here. But what's not mentioned, and I know it's going to be more detailed and it will come out further, is the efficiency savings. Obviously, there's got to be more detail, the targets. But I think also a good opportunity, early as possible, would be is there going to be conversation with local boards a lot earlier? Because my experience as a local board member is the efficiency targets sort of probably come down easier. This is what we're going to do. Here you go, local boards. But often I think that there were opportunities for local boards to offer up their own savings, their own priorities, their own community things to be efficient or cut, shall we say, rather than us telling them. The libraries is a good example. I know that there was a standardisation to save a whole lot of money within libraries, but then some areas actually had increased hours, which they didn't want. Others had reduced hours, which they were appalled by. So I think this is a big opportunity to actually ask local boards, because a lot of them are probably signed ledgers and probably do want reduced rates for their communities as well, but also often the same people are saying we don't want anything taken or cut or
So there is a
reduced.
question there, and it was right in the middle.
Yeah, so that's the question is, how are you going to consult with local boards early to get probably offerings from them before you tell them what you're cutting or
Matthew,
saving?
just the normal process. I will say part of that process has happened the other day when we did have that first meeting. It was a little bit disappointing that only 8 of there were 16 councillors there, which was a fantastic turnout, but there were only 8 local board chairs attended, which was a little bit disappointing. So they have got the meeting on the 12th of December to also hopefully come en masse. So that's part of the process. And Matthew, just normal, the rest of the...
Through the chair, and probably just restate a couple of numbers and a little bit on process. So I'm not so sure, to be honest, about the idea that we're currently programmed to explicitly reach out to local boards and ask them directly what they might contribute. But I think we've got a process that will honour the intent. So currently in budgets, in this year, which is still will be a challenge for some, the organisation is tasked with reducing its core cost base by 25 million. And next year, which is the budget we're talking about, we have 17 million in there to kick the process off. I just want to take a moment for people to just reference those numbers. So 25 and 17, if I can do the maths, is around the 40 million mark. And people have talked about savings of between 3 to 6% of council's core costs. Well, at 40 million, that's a couple of percent. Okay, so I think it's really important that you understand we have savings in our baseline budgets now. The extent to which those are delivered on this year, next year, and then off whatever reset LTP base that you put in place, my suggestion would be to you that you will almost guarantee a further 3% reduction at least in council's core cost base. Equally, and I think you've heard it from management, and it's come out of some of the recent discussions with local boards, there's also a sense that is ultimately limited, that we start to get into tricky space where we might be challenging the service that's being delivered as much as how efficiently it's being delivered. And I think management have been fairly consistent in saying those savings which we feel we can identify and execute that are pure efficiency. But I think increasingly now on the table, and perhaps particularly in areas that are important to local boards, there's a sense that we may have to have an even softer pair of hands and make absolutely sure that when we follow up on savings targets and people's budgets, we're really respectful of local board domain and we enter into that dialogue with them, which is, I'm absolutely sure as a matter of process now for next year, staff will be doing over the coming 2 or 3 months as they address how they're going to go about executing that $17 million number in next year's budget. So there's lots of disciplines and process already in place for next year's budget that will definitely flush out the sort of things that I think you're talking about.